Jeremiah, and you're listening to Christian Anarchy.
We begin with concluding remarks. Pick up the pieces and examine the parts. Your words always cut when they're cliche. But here's my knife because I came for the buffet. This is the way it goes when you're a part of it. Never the same words, philosophising then. I'm marked beneath the trend. I've caught you once again.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to Christian Anarchy. Going live again on YouTube, figuring this stuff out. Eventually, I might even become skilled at it. A couple of things before I begin the show. One, I wanted to talk about some of the stuff last time that I said. So I didn't edit the podcast again because why do that when you can just make it easy and do it live and be done with it? As long as you guys still listen to me, it's all fine. But I noticed, because I checked the end of the episode to see how much was cut off at the end of the YouTube video, and I noticed one thing I said was I encouraged you, maybe exhorted to the listeners to abolish the state. And one of the things I said was to please abolish the state. I believe I said for me right before I said for God. And don't do that for me. I'm not leading some sort of Christian anarchist rebellion cult thing where everyone follows me as some great leader. I think that was just me trying to hit the post and finish talking at the exact same time that the lyrics to the song started. So don't do that. And also, I'm not sure if this was actually a mistake I made, but late at night when I was lying in my bed trying to sleep, thinking about whether or not the baby was going to wake up soon, I believe that I called an adverb an adjective. So sorry about that. That was a huge error. And I'm just noticing now that the last 3 shirts I've worn on this have all been dark colors, and I'm not a huge fan of dark colors, but all the cool shirts I know of are in dark colors except for my Ninja Turtle shirt. I believe that's the only one I own that I enjoy wearing that isn't completely black. Today will be the second to last episode, for real, I believe, of the show. Next time I'll talk a little bit about ruler defiers in the scriptures and a little bit about some other topics. And I will tell you the name and provide links to the new podcast, which is set to start at this point on December 11th at 6 p.m. Central Time. Could be delayed. Those things happen. But hopefully that will be when it starts. But I still don't have a feed on iTunes and stuff for you to subscribe to. And today, if you are watching this on YouTube, you will notice I am joined by someone who sent me an email and wanted to be on the show. Her name is Kim. Kim, say hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being a part of this today. I appreciate it, and it's always good to talk to someone new who rejects the violence of the state. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Whatever you want to tell people. I'm flexible.
Well, it's only been not long since I wanted to abolish the state. I actually became a libertarian last October, and I fell into the usual joke they say, what's the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist? 6 months. And
Yeah.
I am literally that joke.
Nice.
But the best part of it was I started running for state senate in the middle of that transition, so I was like, okay.
What state?
Nevada.
Nevada, okay.
Yeah. So I was 3 weeks into running when I just realized that the state isn't necessary. So you're just thinking, oh, here I go running for office, and I don't think the state is necessary. But I went with it anyway because if you want somebody to make sure that the state doesn't grow, I guess an anarchist is the perfect person. Because I'm like, I don't want any power, just abolish whatever I can. Of course,
Yeah.
I went, but I did get 30% against the number 2 Democrat here, so that was a huge dent in
Nice.
ego.
Yeah.
But I've been listening to your podcast since about close to the beginning, so I'm happy to be on.
Okay. close to the beginning, like when it started in June of 2015. Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yes, somewhere around there.
Okay. Wow.
I think you had a few episodes out, like only a few. And then
Okay. Gotcha.
maybe 10 or so, something like that, and then I just kept going with it.
Sweet. Well, thanks for listening. It's a weird thing when people listen to your voice for hours on end. You're like, oh, I guess I have something that people enjoy hearing. I don't know. It's still kind of a trippy experience for me because it's so deliberate. You have to be very deliberate about listening to a podcast as opposed to a radio show or a sermon, or people are just stuck in church anyway. They're not going to get up and leave, So I'm sure they do sometimes, but they're normally polite enough.
Oh, well, I was usually the sound engineer in churches, so
Okay.
if I got up to leave, that would be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I was normally popping everything anyway in church. It didn't matter who the sound engineer was. I still lack mic control. And you? What's that?
I said, were you one of those people where you have to ride the fader because, like, oh my goodness, is it gonna start yelling? No.
No, I think that listeners of the podcast know, at least by now, that I'm not very given to yelling, at least.
No, you're very quiet.
Yeah, I try to be as quiet as possible for fear that people might hear and understand what I'm saying. You have 2 podcasts of your own. Would you like to talk about those at all?
The first one's Newborn Libertarian, and that one's pretty obvious. It was one I started when I became a libertarian. It started out all because of the circus that was this presidential cycle. I was a Democrat. I'll go ahead and admit it. I guess if you're probably watching the YouTube, you can go ahead and fall into the stereotype if you look at a black woman. Yes, I was a Democrat. And I saw on the GOP side, it was 8 million people on a stage to the point that they had to have a kiddie table debate after. And then I looked on the Democrat side, and you had 3 Polish people who were lying to me. And I just remember going, what am I watching? Why am I doing this? And I remember years ago thinking about a philosophy called libertarianism, where it says, you leave me alone, basically, and I leave you alone. And I typed it into iTunes and found the Jason Stapleton program. I remember listening to that, and it kind of shocked me a little, because when you go from the government must fix everything to the government really shouldn't fix everything. And I entered his private Facebook group and started meeting people there, and got the shock of my life, because everybody's telling you all different stuff. And, I still had the social justice warrior mindset.
Yeah.
And then I met a really awesome guy who was an anarchist, who is still a friend today, and is actually the co-host of Newborn Libertarian.
Nice.
And what happened is he started a Skype group where we just talked about the news and asked questions. And I had been a podcaster since 2007, just doing all sorts of different things, TV shows, and I thought he seemed like a really awesome guy to do a podcast with. And
Yeah.
as a new libertarian, I was like, this would be awesome. He can help me through my journey. So if you listen to that podcast from episode 1, you can hear the beginning of me being sort of still kind of a progressive, and partially being a libertarian to a conservative constitutional libertarian
Yep.
to an ANCAP.
All right.
So my entire libertarian journey with my ANCAP friend, who is still my mentor, and the only reason I've gotten all the way from leftist to nothing left at all, I just can't
Yeah.
stand it anymore. And so that's how that podcast. We'll have debates. We've had debates about all the NAP versus consequential. Sometimes we'll have rants. We'll have guests from other podcasts. We'll sometimes have people of different backgrounds on. And then we have the one I just started up with 2 other friends, where it's basically just 2 former Republicans, and we do title it a white woman who's a former Republican, a white man who's a former Republican, and a black woman who's a former Democrat walk into a libertarian bar and talk about liberty. It's called Make Liberty Great Again.
Nice.
No, it's not a Trump podcast. We just
Right, but you're playing off him a little bit, taking advantage of that statement. One of my friends has I believe he made T-shirts like showing like a darkened American flag, which was make America defiant again, which I appreciated. Yes, let's defy oppressors and support and advocate individual liberty. Well, awesome. That's cool. You've been podcasting for a long time, and you're an excellent talker, which is perfect to have on this. I just noticed now, if you happen to be listening to this episode, I'm working out the kinks and remembering to do stuff. I did not hit record on my recorder, so you will be getting audio coming from this YouTube video, which will be a lot worse, just as a fair warning. I'm always apologizing for audio quality. That's one of the things that happens when you spend half your time figuring out how to make a podcast with decent audio. Okay, now Kim is going to help me talk about one of the things that bothered me when I was reading Twitter one day 3 months ago. And I'm going to read for you what I wrote down that day, what the tweets were. And the person said that the wage is not an agreement about the value of the employee by the employer and the employee, which is true. That's accurate. That's not an agreement of how valuable the employee is. And this person then went on to talk about the solution to this problem. And he said that work should be voluntary. And he said that the way to do that is to have a universal basic income. That bothered me for a lot of reasons. And I think that most times in history, this would not be a subject that people were talking about, or an idea that anyone except for the kings and queens of the world would ever entertain, because no one was naive enough about reality to think that voluntary labor could be a real thing. But I do believe it is something worth discussing, at least in part right now, because it's such a common idea that somehow people who don't work at all should just automatically be given a certain amount of money every week or month or 2 weeks, whatever. That's pretty irrelevant, but should be given a certain amount of money regardless of whether or not they're laboring or not. Kim, any comments?
All right, I can understand this mindset because, of course, I came from the left. But
Yeah.
this is a joke that I always say is like, well, once you learn economics, you'll no longer be a leftist, because I need to figure out where we get this money tree that's going to make this possible. The only thing that can be voluntary about work is voluntarily finding a job and finding the workplace that's going to accept you. But the thing is we don't have an infinite amount of money to be able to provide for everybody. We also don't have an infinite amount of food and resources to give to everybody either. So. Yes. If work was voluntary for everyone and they could just sit in their home and do no labor, there would be no food. There would be no product. There would be no one to bring it to the neighborhood. It's one of those things. One of the things I thought about when I read this was just how incredibly privileged of an idea it was. And I don't mean privilege. Some people use that as a criticism or use it to try to make people feel guilty. But it comes because the reason why it seems like it's even logical in part to provide a universal income for everyone, even people who aren't working, is because of all the people that have come before and all of the capital investment that is built up over history. It used to be the case in the world that 90% of the population had to farm, otherwise they would die. It is no longer the case now because of the time and energy and brilliant ideas and work and resources provided by capital investors to make labor more efficient. Were you going to say something, Kim? Yeah. Yeah, it just, I mean, it was beyond me to watch so many people clamoring for socialism and everything. I was like, did you realize that having capitalism is what gave us so much wealth and the way society is, and now you're expecting to just sit back and somehow enjoy the fruits of that and expect it
Yeah.
to go on for an eternity? It's not going to. That's the reason you have to work in order to be able to sit back. And it's if everybody sits back,
Yeah.
or my favorite is, I guess the thing is, all the people who are able and the rich people are supposed to be the people who do all the work. Well, if that's the case, they always talk about the 1%. I'm like, the 1% is not a huge amount, and so I don't see how they're going to be able to serve everybody.
Yeah. You're talking about, people sitting back. Yeah. People don't actually realize that the reason there is so much wealth is because of all the other things that have come before, like you're saying. And a lot of people think that all this wealth exists because of laborers, because of people who went and worked at a job for X number of dollars per hour. And it is true that they played an absolutely vital role in that, but it wasn't because a bunch of people went out and farmed with their hands for hours on end that the world, that people who came before us were able to create so much wealth that we live in such abundance that the poor can talk to people on a device in their hand. It's absolutely historically ridiculous, the kind of wealth that we live in. And it's not from people just going out and working extra hard on the farm. It's from people making capital investments. I don't know if I want to get into this, but that every time I say that, then I start getting into it. So I guess I do. I'm not sure how economically literate all my listeners are. I'm not even that economically literate, but capital is basically any like material good that makes labor more efficient. That's not an exact definition, but it will suit our purposes. One way that Murray Rothbard talks about it in a book, Man, Economy, and State, which you can get, I listen to it on audio, which is a lot to process via audio, but it's worth listening on Mises.org. But he brings things down to their most basic level. And one thing he does is, it's called Crusoe economics, where he imagines Robinson Crusoe on an island alone by himself. And he imagines that I'm using his ideas and putting them in my own framing. So this isn't exact to the book at all, but I do want to acknowledge that the foundation from it kind of comes from him. Imagine Crusoe picks berries to survive, and we'll say he picks 1,000 berries a week on 100 hours of labor, because you got to go and you got to find the berries and you got to put them in your hands and you got to bring them back. And then that's about what he needs to survive. About 1,000 berries a week gives him enough energy to keep picking to survive. And then Crusoe, instead of using his time outside of that 100 hours a week to engage in leisure activity or work on his shelter, he chooses to invest it in capital. And what he does first, say, is he weaves a basket. He weaves a basket to carry the berries in, so he doesn't have to keep making so many trips back to his shelter with the berries. And then he finds, after he weaves the basket, using his extra time, he finds that he is able to pick 1,400 berries in a week in the same amount of time. And then he develops a berry picking tool, and he freed up some of his time with the basket, so he can still pick 1,000 berries a week, but now he can do it in 90 hours, say, or 85 hours. And now he makes a tool where he can pick berries. And let's say that tool took him a month to make. And that is a capital investment of labor and energy and mental ideas. I don't know what I was going to say with mental, but we'll say ideas and the goods and products around him. That is a capital investment to make a tool to pick berries more efficiently. So now he can pick all the berries he needs. He has his basket set up in 40 hours a week. That is what capital investment does. His labor used to be worth 10 berries an hour is what it was, I think. 100 10 berries an hour is what his labor used to be worth. And if now in 50 hours a week he can pick the same amount of berries, his labor is now worth 20 berries an hour. The value of labor increases with capital investment. So the reason why we are at a place now where 50% of the population, thereabouts, it's not that much, but let's say 50% of the population working can pay for the other 50% to survive. The reason why there is so much leftover cash and resources and I guess it's and food and everything that people need to survive is because capital investment over the course of time and over the course of years, especially in the last 150 years with the invention of the engine and the putting to use of that to agriculture, which completely changed the way the entire world functions. That investment has made labor incredibly efficient, so much so that only a small percentage of our time is spent getting enough food to eat, when it used to be most of every individual's time was engaged in getting what they need to survive. Kim, any comments? I just keep talking.
It's okay.
I'm losing you on the video. I'm not sure what's up with that.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of frozen there. I don't know if you can still hear me, though.
Yeah, I can still hear.
Okay, good, because I am staring at my awkward screen. I wish I was just frozen on smile.
Yeah.
But usually when I talk to people, when it comes
Yeah.
to
Hey, Kim. Call me back and I will keep talking. All right. All right. Thanks. All right. YouTube. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what this looks like right now. We're figuring it out. I hope that makes sense. This analysis of economics. A lot of this stuff is over hundreds and hundreds of pages that I'm trying to distill into this one conversation. Oh, call failed. We'll try calling Kim. Thanks for bearing with me, listeners. Hello? Kim? I can't hear you. Sorry. So it seems like a privileged position to me when people talk about a universal basic income, because it's from this position where you're standing on this foundation of wealth that other people have been building up over hundreds of years, has been the most significant amount of development of wealth. I'm working on changing my settings a little bit so YouTube's actually looking at me, because right now people are looking at my Skype, which is not ideal. I found it. Nope, I didn't. I'm gonna find it though, you guys. Oh, that's not ideal. If you're listening to this on podcast, I cannot tell you how extraordinarily sorry I am for these long pauses as we figure out Skype stuff. Don't know if I'll be using Skype consistently in the future. We'll see. And now Kim is calling again. Excellent.
Okay.
Are you back?
Yes.
Hey, all right, cool. I just transitioned to a different thing, but we'll figure this out. Do you remember what you're going to say?
Oh, yes.
Please talk while I do technical crap.
Well, usually when I try to explain economics, because I think what it is a lot of people, what they're normally assuming with economics is that the employer basically gets away with allowing themselves to just make a ton of money and exploit workers, and somehow they need to be able to fix that because the workers are somehow getting gypped in the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I usually just tell people, okay, there are three things that we have to make sure of as a business owner, before even the the CEO can make sure they have their stash of money. And one of the more important things to know in a market is that the market is run by the consumers, because guess where your revenue comes from? It comes from the consumers. If the consumers are not buying your products, then you make no money. And of course, well, if you're running a business, you have to pay the rent, so you have to have land. And like you were saying, you have to invest in your product and your produce. So, I mean, you have to invest because you have to have enough saved away to make sure you have enough product. So you have to pay for that. And
Yeah.
so now you have to make sure that your product is desirable so that consumers buy it. You can't skimp on that. So now, if you're in a pinch, and especially my favorite is when we come to also have the minimum wage talk, because everybody wants the fight for 15.
Right.
They will sit there and talk about, oh, well, we have to raise it. I'm like, well, you don't understand that when you start raising it, uh, along with the fact that inflation also keeps going up and you're
Right.
taxed all over the place. Well, where are you going to skimp? You're not going to skimp on the rent, obviously, because you'll be out of business. You won't have a location. You can't skimp on the product, because if you start, for some reason, say, your cheeseburgers start tasting horrible because you're skimping on certain things, nobody will buy it. Like I said, the consumers run the market, and they will no longer pay for your food, and now you can't pay for anything. So where do you end up cutting? It's going to be employees, because your product always has to be good enough for people to continue buying. So you'll only stick with the employees who make your product the best, so that consumers continue paying you, because they're the ones with the money. They're the bring in the revenue. And so I always have to explain that entire thing for people to finally realize this is how a business is run. It's not because CEOs are greedy. It's because consumers run the market. They're the only ones giving you revenue. So if they're unhappy, you can't skimp on the rent. They can't skimp on the produce and saving, investing in that. So it'll be employees. So it's just like you have to give this whole entire thing in order to lay the basis for why the universal basic income can't work. It's like you have to give an entire economics lesson.
Yeah. Yeah, at least aspects of it. An entire economics lesson is too much. All right, Kim, I'm going to hang up on you and try calling you back again so that my video is on. All right, thank you. It still doesn't like me.
Okay.
You guys? Oh, we made it? Did we make it? Yeah. Yeah, I just got to figure out how to expand this. There. Hey, we're back to whatever normal is for this. All right.
Okay.
Oh, did you call me on your phone? Is that what changed?
Yeah, I had to do that because all of a sudden my internet was dropping all over the place.
Gotcha. That's what happened. All right. See you guys. Thank you so much for enduring poor podcasts so that I can figure out what's going on and how to hopefully avoid these problems in the future. Yeah. I mentioned what he said was that wage is not an agreement about value by employer-employee, which is true, but that sort of makes it out to be that somehow the employer is somehow taking advantage of the employee because the employee thinks he's worth more. The truth about most interactions between employer and employee and the person buying a product and the person selling a product is that the employer would like the best employee for the lowest price they can pay so that they can make the maximum amount of money. Not every employer chooses to function that way. In fact, most don't, and most choose to function in a somewhat more balanced way. But on average, what you're going to see is people looking out for their own self-interest. The employer wants to best employee, cheapest price. Employee wants the least amount of work, the most fun work at the absolute highest wage rate they can get. And the relationship between employer and employee is an agreement which meets those two competing desires of each somewhere in the middle. I don't know if in the middle is the right word, but it's at a place where the employer says, it is worth my while, worth my money, worth my headache to put the time into training this person and to pay them X amount of dollars to get them to do this job. And the employee says, it is worth my time to work this job for this amount of money. While it's not an agreement about the value of the person and how much value they will add to the company, it is a voluntarily made agreement where each party believes that they are better off for having engaged in the relationship. So it's not something to be criticized, but I do think that these tweets and this notion reflects something that is true and really negative about the world we live in right now, which is that employers have, especially large corporations, have a huge advantage over everyone else due to the government intervention in markets. The state benefits big companies more than small companies in every, as I've said, I don't know how often I say it on this podcast, but every regulation is easier, barring a couple that might be exceptional, you could point me to, might be lying, but every regulation is easier for a large company to comply with than a small company. And every tax is much less of a burden on a large company than a small company. I mean, even companies with a couple of employees need to hire an accountant part-time just to figure out how to pay the taxes correctly. That's absolutely ridiculous. Whereas a large company that has hundreds of employees, adding one or two other employees to do accounting is much less of a bite into their profit than smaller companies. So the point is, all the advantages, every law, every regulation, every tax, for the most part, indirectly or absolutely directly, because they lobbied for it, benefits the largest corporations and prevents competition from individuals and smaller companies, which gives businesses, for the most part, an advantage over employees if you want to talk about unfair advantages and disadvantages, because employees face people who don't already have an established business face a lot of barriers to entering the market in a similar or even a completely different area, which means they don't have to, but it's much easier then for them to work for an hourly wage than it is to come into the market and compete as a sole proprietor or as someone who starts a small corporation themselves. Whereas when you remove those barriers, you give employees more opportunities and different opportunities, which gives them more options, which means they won't choose to work for wages as low as what they're choosing now, most likely. You don't know what all the effects would be, but on average, if you give someone more options to make money, they are going to require more money of these kinds of employer-employee relationships. Kim, any comments?
And also the fact, with some of these, especially with businesses being taxed, and that puts a lot of the smaller businesses and some business in the middle, like sometimes the consumers get a bad deal with that, because sometimes they start passing some of those taxes off onto the consumer.
Yeah.
In order to, because businesses can't go in debt, so if they're getting taxed all over the place, if they can get away with it, they'll pass it on to the consumer. So the government is not really helping businesses there either, and
No.
it's terrible for businesses to do, but you have to think about it. If you're trying to stay profitable, you might end up in a situation where you're like, well, how much can we pass this on to the consumer and
Yeah.
tax?
Yeah, you have to, and even if you don't call it a tax, you still have to pass on the cost somehow. You can't lose money on what you produce for very long, and that's one of those things too, where people tend to, people are very hesitant to blame government for a lot of different things, and they love blaming businesses for things. So if businesses raise their prices, people rarely trace it to tariffs or some sort of government tax increase on the business or some sort of government regulation which makes their business cost more to run. Instead, they just blame the business for trying to stiff consumers when really the business is trying to offer the best service they can, or the service that will please consumers the most so that they can make the most amount of money. And it's the state that interferes in these voluntary relationships and these provisions of the best services to people, whatever they happen to be.
Well, if they just shrunk the government a lot, because if you think about it, the government is a gigantic machine that doesn't make its own money. It is literally paid in all tax dollars. So we don't really need a UBI. Just cut a bunch of the government, and guess where all that extra money would go? Right back to people. So the government doesn't make a single dollar and doesn't produce anything.
Well, I think the post office makes some money.
I think they're in the red now.
They are.
Yeah, because they're kind of a failure right now. They have to be like bailed out.
They've always been a failure. I'm not sure if I've mentioned on this podcast, but one abolitionist anarchist in the 1800s named Lysander Spooner. Yeah, way to go, Kim. I'm so glad to be talking to people that know stuff. He actually started delivering mail, and he did it cheaper and faster than the government. So then the solution the government had was not, oh, I guess we don't need a post office anymore because people in the market can do it cheaper than we can. Instead, they made a law making it illegal for people to deliver priority mail so that they could maintain their monopoly over the post office. And Spooner, naturally, was no longer able to run his business. So that's the way the government functions. That's the only reason why the post office is still in existence and is able to make money off stamps, because delivering priority mail is illegal. I mean, why would you allow people to bring letters to other people's homes and put them in their mailbox? The chaos, the anarchy, the absolute. You want warlords to take over? I mean, that's the way it starts. Letters.
Yeah. That's my favorite argument ever. Has always been, oh, the chaos, the anarchy, and monopoly and everything. Like, you already have that. It's called government.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in a conversation with someone the other day, not a real one, a Google Plus conversation is what it was. And he was yes, I can't, it used to be more enjoyable, and I just can't, I haven't been on Facebook in 2 weeks. I need to apologize to people, be like, sorry, I can't reply to any comments anymore. But we were talking about, he was saying that you'll always have warlords. Either they'll be like Bush and Obama in suits, or they'll be wearing animal skins, which is completely, I gave him examples of societies that have existed without a government and therefore without warlords. And he talks about that. Like, warlords are only an inevitability in society when you have a state, because the state exists by acting like a warlord. They are certainly not a requirement without one.
We need to find this debunk anarchy wiki that they keep going to, because every time I say warlords, I'm like, where are you finding this Wikipedia page with that same answer on it? Like, I need to find this page.
Yeah, I don't know.
Same argument.
That's funny. It's a weird, I think it's a fear. I don't know what it's, if it's like from movies or something, could be. Yeah. The Walking Dead.
Negan. Like, we might have a Negan. I'm like, no.
Yeah. Was Negan or, there was a few memes. I think The Art of Not Being Governed put up a few good Negan memes a while back, showing him to be like the government politicians. And then there was something else. His requirement for 50% was taxation, and then his bat was the police. I thought that was a perfect one. I can't remember the details. I think it was pretty much when he first came on the scene. What else? Kim, anything else you want to say about universal basic income? Or the topic in general?
I just think it's another, I know I've had people tell me, well, we have to get somewhere because I know everybody, they'll want the pragmatic steps and
Yeah.
say we can't just get to anarchy overnight. I know that's obvious. However, these are kind of the arguments I take personally, as somebody who actually came from the state loves to, and I'm going to go ahead and say it as a minority, I'm going to go ahead and say it. The state loves to trap minorities into the welfare trap. It's if you think about it, it's a brilliant plan. LBJ had a good idea. You might want to look that up. Somebody, well, you can go out there.
Yeah.
There's a couple words in that statement I cannot say on the podcast, but it was a really good plan.
Thank you for your discretion.
Yes, to just trap people in it. And my mom was in it to the point where she was working 3 jobs for me and my brother. And when she tried to get a car to get to her 3 jobs, because she was barely just making it, and she just needed to get to her 3 jobs, and she was trying to make it out of welfare, but she just needed the car to get to her jobs. They told her she couldn't get a car. They wanted her to sell it, or she couldn't be on welfare. She's like, well, I'm trying to get out of welfare, but I just need the car so I can make it to the jobs to get out of welfare. But they're like, no, you have to sell it. She's like, wait a minute, do you want me to get on my feet or not?
Yeah.
So
No,
clear,
absolutely not. Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why so much of the actual tax burden falls upon the middle class and the upper middle class, especially relatively, is because if you can keep people who are making an average income barely making it, people are making $40,000 to $60,000 a year. If you can make their life difficult by decreasing the value of the dollar and taxing them to the point where their income is way less and they don't have as much expendable income as they would like, they still feel more dependent on the state, and I think that's tenfold in terms of the welfare state, the way that it makes people feel dependent. And unlike a charity, which charities that did that bad of a job spending that much money trying to help people and help people get out of poverty would simply not, there would be no donations going to them anymore. Donations. Or they would be rewarded with more donations from people for actually helping people get ahead in life. But when you keep them from getting ahead in life, you can buy more votes. And you can make people feel vulnerable, and vulnerable people are much more willing to be like, government is necessary. I support aggressive violence on my neighbor because I need to, just to survive and make it and be safe in the world.
I mean, they're rioting in the streets right now because they think it's going to be taken away, and I'm like, well, good, because my mom decided after what she went through, me and my brother were not going into the welfare trap.
Nice.
And she just said after high school was college or military, and I went to college, my brother went to the military, and we're both in IT now, have our own
Nice.
apartments. We didn't ever go on welfare because my mom was like, no, we're not doing that. And it's all because we figured it out, that the keys is just basically determination, will, education, and just, there might be some struggle, yes, but
Yeah.
you got to get out of that, and it takes effort and just not being dependent. And I just think people need to learn that one. And it has nothing to do with, the stuff that I used to say as a Democrat. You don't understand the minority struggle. Nope, it's just because the government knows the group to put in that trap. But everybody has the same opportunity if they're willing to put in the effort and the time and get the education and just the determination and will. And even though universal basic income supposedly is supposed to be a step away from welfare, you cannot convince me that the state won't decide to pump that whole thing up and make it another version of welfare, because they know they're going to have more lazy people that are going to use it. They're going to use it again, and it's going to become welfare. That's how it always goes.
Yeah. You never want to give the state more options to take money from people or to give money to people, because they're going to misuse it. And to what you're saying, politicians have always been willing to use whatever groups they can, if they want to call them a minority based on race, or whatever groups that they can, to get more power and to use as some sort of I don't know, not a trophy, but a display to elicit compassion from others, to justify more aggression and justify their own power and why their role is so necessary and valuable. Thank you, Kim, for this conversation. I really appreciate it. It's been good to talk to you. I'm going to wrap things up, obviously, as I believe you're probably getting the hint on that one. Yep. Would you like to tell people where to find you? I don't know if you have things you want to plug. And then afterward, if you want to throw some links in the Skype chat, and I'll add it to the podcast episode page as well as the YouTube page so that people can find podcasts you're involved in if you want to plug that stuff, or any social media.
You can find me personally at the Lone Token. That's definitely a South Park reference, because I was always the one who had to play bass in everything. You can find my podcast, Newborn Libertarian, at Newborn Liberty. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all that good stuff, and we have a Facebook page. And then for Make Liberty Great Again, we just started up. That's on iTunes, Stitcher. We have YouTube.
Nice.
Find us. I think. Oh man, I'll just have to give you the link.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the Twitter is.
That's all right. People know, so.
Yeah, but and we also have a Facebook private group for that, so you can only enter Make Liberty Great Again if you're cool.
Oh, so you have to be cool to enter it? Is it like a special private Facebook group?
Yes.
Are you trying to make money off of it, like Tom Woods?
No.
Okay.
We're cool. We got one episode. You just can't say you're cool when you got one episode.
No, you can't. You can say you're cool, but yeah.
We want to make it a nice, close-knit liberty community for people who are serious about liberty and just want to, talk about things and not have, a lot of drama. It's just a nice place where people can just talk about liberty and whatever, and just,
Cool. Sweet. Well, thanks, listeners, and thank you again to Kim for helping me work out the kinks to this stuff. I will be back sometime this week, probably. If I had to guess, I would do a Tuesday or Thursday night, another live stream, in case listeners are interested in seeing it. Anyway, peace out.